Oh, nearly fell off my chair. Right. Okay. Daughter's gone back to sleep, but for how long? Who the hell knows? This is the oldest daughter as well. We didn't get any sleep last night, all of us, because at 4 o'clock in the morning, I still felt like it was 11 o'clock at night. So all of us are just. Fortunately, it's still weekend. We've got another day off before we go back to work, and we're going to need it, I tell you. Right. So we've just done the Palm Ridge Reserve, which was minute scale, not even small scale, Ant-Man scale, absolutely tiny. So what we're now going to do is go the other end of the scale and go to apparently the 4th biggest selling American whiskey, because we can't call it bourbon, and I should tell you why. So this is Early Times miniature. This is one of the miniatures I bought from Total Wine and More, who, when I was over in Orlando, basically my wife had requested that I didn't make it public that we were over in Orlando, essentially because if you make it obvious that you're in another country, it's kind of advertising the fact that your house is open for burglary. So she basically said to me, look, I don't mind you doing videos while we're on holiday, but could you just keep it quiet that you're not actually on holiday? So I was talking about Total Wine and More while we were out there, and God, I wish I was out there. I wish we were over there right now, but we're not, so carry on. So I was being a bit coy about Total Wine and More. Basically, Total Wine and More in Orlando, near Mall at Millennia, which is a fantastic shopping centre. I went in there and spoke to a really nice girl called Anelka Arnold, I think her name was, who was not the manager but one of the supervisors for the day. Basically explained what I was doing and said, look, this is what I'm doing. Now they've got quite a good selection of miniatures by the front of the tills. They've got a phenomenal whiskey selection, absolutely brilliant. And they had quite a good range of miniatures and quite a lot of ones that I hadn't got on my list. So I said, look, I'm hoping, this is what I'm doing, this is my challenge, here's a card, and I'm basically hoping that I might be able to get some miniatures donated if needs be. So she was like, well, okay, we've got this corporate philanthropy, where basically you email Total Wine and say, look, I'm doing this charity event, we want to, is it possible you can donate either tickets to a wine tasting or some bottles or blah 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 blah. So there's a form to fill out online. Okay, I was like, okay, what I'll do is I'll get the miniatures together of the ones that are basically I'd like. I'm only looking at 10 max if needs be. This particular one, 99 cents. 99 cents for a miniature. It's nuts. The most expensive one I think was $2.79 for a miniature, which is just ridiculous. So it was like I'm looking at 10, 12, maybe max. And I'll pay for some if needs be, but any that you might be able to donate would be fantastic. So I'll line them up, take a picture of them, and then when I get in contact with Total Wine, they'll know that this. I just want one of each of these. So as I'm lining them all up, all of a sudden I turn around and half of them have gone. So like, hang on, where's that gone? She was like, oh, I'll tell you what, these ones, we've got a good deal with the suppliers. I'll write you these off for you. I'll give you these as a donation. So she actually gave me 5 miniatures as a donation. Fantastic. Anelka, thank you so much. That's so kind of you. I'm hoping that nobody higher up in Total Wine is actually going to bollock her for that, because it was a really, really kind thing to do, and really, really appreciated. This particular one, it turns out that I got in touch with Total Wine and More. It was one of these auto forms where it's like, right, what are you doing, when are you doing it, and you couldn't submit the form until you'd completed everything. So I had to put a date in of when my event was, even though this is running for a year. So I just put 8th of June, because essentially it was a case of, they say, yes, you can have this, they contact the store and say, this person's coming in to pick these up, let them have it. So I put the 8th of June, because it's like, well, we leave on the 9th, so if we put the 8th, then that at least gives them 2 weeks until I can go and pick it up. Get an email back from Total Wine official, sorry, we can't donate anything to you because it is less than 60 days from the date of your event. Like, what, eh? So I was just like, whatever. So as it turns out, the other miniatures that they had, I had to buy. I think it was 7 of them I've bought, a grand total of $16. So, $16. Okay, fair enough. For 6 or 7 miniatures, I'm not really going to complain, to be perfectly honest. So this is one of the ones I actually had to purchase, and this is a massive 99 cents for a miniature, which is shocking. There's a chain of shops, liquor stores in Palm Beach, in Florida. So it's basically, if you look at Miami, I'm not going to put the map up, but if you look at Miami and go up the coast, kind of there's a run of these shops. They're called Crown Wine and Spirits. They sell 75 cl of early times for $11. So we are looking at cheap whiskey. And it's kind of got a bit of a reputation because it's cheap whiskey. Now, this is not bourbon. On the label, it says you might be able to pick it up. That's where the camera is. You're hoping you might be able to pick it up. This is early times Kentucky whiskey. And the reason that this can't be called bourbon is because one of the laws to be called bourbon is you have to mature your spirit in brand new charred oak barrels. Early times actually use barrels that have previously held spirit in beforehand. Bourbon, whiskey, probably. But they then age their early time spirit in these barrels. So they can't call it bourbon, and that's why it's a Kentucky whiskey. What you might have also noticed is it's whiskey spelled without the E. Now that is purely a marketing thing, because it doesn't matter whether it's spelled with an E or without an E, that makes no difference whatsoever. It's basically, Scotch started off without the E. Irish became quite popular. They spelt it with an E to differentiate themselves. The Americans took on the E spelling. Japanese whiskey tends to be spelt without the E, as does Canadian, because they want to separate themselves from American whiskey, which has got the E. But there are some American whiskies like George Dickel and this, which spell it without the E, because they want to differentiate themselves as well. It's purely a personal marketing preference. It means it doesn't really mean anything at all, whether it's spelled with an E or without the E. So it's quite interesting to see that it isn't bourbon. They actually have a early times, I think it's early times 354. Early times 354 does actually meet all the criteria to be called bourbon, so they can market themselves. So early times was created by a guy called John Henry Beam, no relation to Jim Beam whatsoever. And it was set up in a place that was actually called Early Time Station. It was a railway station. In Nelson County, Kentucky, which is here, in 1866. And it struggled through Prohibition, and by 1918 it shut, and by 1920 the actual distillery itself was essentially razed to the ground. Now in 1923, Brown-Forman, who are a massive drinks company who own Jack Daniels amongst other major brands, they bought essentially the whiskey, remaining whiskey stocks, and also the name and the rights and everything like that to it. They bought that, and they were using it during Prohibition as a medicinal spirit. They then put loads of effort into early times, and they actually made it at one point the biggest selling whiskey in America. And so I read early times is still the fourth biggest selling American whiskey in the world. It's huge in Japan, apparently. Now it's cheap, which is probably quite a large part of it. So this is one of those where, and I'm sure I've had early times and I cannot remember, but this is one where a price already puts some kind of precursor in your head in, well, it's going to be shit, and it's going to taste rubbish, and it's going to taste harsh, and everything like that. In terms of what the mix is in it, I've no idea. Oh, I forgot to mention, Brown-Forman actually now make the distillery to make the early times is actually in a place called Shively, which is literally in Louisville. So if I put the map back up of where Nelson County was, you'll see just above that is where Louisville is, and this is literally just on the outskirts of Louisville. If the Google pointer was pointing where Shively is, it would basically be pointing at the centre of Louisville. So in terms of what the makeup of this is, I honestly have no idea. Because of the reason it's not called bourbon is because of it being aged in used oak barrels. I would guess that it's probably over 51% corn. So I think it's basically the barrels are why it can't be bourbon. If they put it in new barrels, it would be. So it would then be over 51% corn. It's not a Kentucky straight whiskey, but then Kentucky straight, it's got to be straight bourbon to be aged for over 2 years. Whether you could have Kentucky straight whiskey that was aged for, I don't know. So aging wise, it's probably not that old anyway. They're selling bucket loads of the stuff, so I can't imagine they're going to be keeping it that long in cask. It's bottled at 40%, and we shall see. This is so this was 99 cents, and I'm doing a 25ml shot. So this is 49 cents worth of whiskey. There's almost a trace of like chlorine, like swimming pools. It's not unpleasant, but it's weird. Yeah, there is a kind of swimming pool-y vibe to it on the nose. There's that kind of harshness of chlorine that you get when you walk into a public baths. It's quite spirity, but it's quite fresh as well. That chlorine vibe is giving it a freshness as well. Like I say, it's not unpleasant, but it's a little bit unnerving. Very little to it. There's a hint of caramel right at the start, and then it just dies. It just disappears. There's something there. There's quite a bit of brown sugar as well. A sort of caramel, brown sugar, very little spice. There's a spirity edge to it, which is, it's not nasty, but it's just giving it a little bit of harshness. But to be honest, there's not a great deal on this. This is like Ballantine's Pure Malt that I uploaded a couple of days ago, which had nothing to it. Hague Club, it's that sort of level of, there's not a great deal. And yet, they're really popular brands. The thing is, at $11 for a 75cl bottle, you wouldn't be expecting a lot anyway. And it's not rough as anything. It's not a horrible whiskey. I would expect a lot worse for $11 for a full-size bottle. I think a 1.5 litre bottle, particularly that Crown Spirits, was $17.99. You know, 12 English pounds. It's just for a 1.5 litre bottle. You would expect something rough, edgy, strip the back of your throat. This is the other way of the cheap stuff, where there's just nothing on it. And I'd rather have that. I'd rather have well, there's not really anything, you can drink it, I'll mix it with something absolutely fine. I'll give it to people that have come over that I'm not really that keen on, but yeah, they can have some early time. There's nothing wrong with it, to be perfectly honest. What flavours are there are actually kind of pleasant. There's kind of a nice brown sugar. There's a nice, like, Werther's Original type caramel. There's actually quite a toffee, fudgy note. You've got to search for it, to be perfectly honest, but there is a quite nice fudgy character to it. It's actually alright. I mean, 99 cents for a miniature is a bit of a bargain. If you've got $12 in your pocket, because I don't think you're going to find this in the UK, and to be honest, if you could find it in the UK, you'd probably be looking at about 20-25 quid. But if you were in America and you were having a party, and you were going to make a punch, and you wanted a bourbon, you wanted a whiskey, not bourbon, but you just wanted a whiskey to put in this punch, $11, to be perfectly honest. It's got enough in it that it's just going to cut through, but there's nothing unpleasant on that whatsoever. If you had somebody coming around that you were trying to impress, you probably wouldn't give them early times, to be honest. You'd give them something interesting like Palm Ridge Reserve, but it's not a bad whiskey, to be perfectly honest. You can turn your nose up at it, and there are faults with it in terms of it's not particularly deep, it's not particularly rich. It's not particularly rich. There's not a huge amount of flavour to it. In fact, there's not a lot of flavour in it at all. But what flavour there is, it's all right, not that bad. So $11 is actually pretty much a bloody bargain, to be perfectly honest. So yeah, aged in. Right, it turned out I'd run out of storage again on my iPad, but I think I pretty much said all I needed to say. I literally did another 5 words and then it cut out. So yeah, early times for $11 a bottle. It's $11 a bottle, so what would you expect? You'd actually expect something worse than this, to be perfectly honest. So for $11 a bottle, no complaints with early times whatsoever. Right, I shall see you at the next one. Cheers.